Hello, everyone. My name is Joyce Bok from Salubrious Events, and I have here with me a very special guest, Eric J. Hecker, all the way from Alaska. And he grew up on Long Island, New York, and he's very well known for disclosing the high energy weapon systems in Antarctica. But I think today I want to talk to him about the psychological effects of living in Antarctica. Me being a psychologist, that would be very intriguing for me to see the test of the human, where the human limits are, if there are any, and the potentials. Antarctica is such a the harshest, most hostile place on planet Earth, and the temperatures range from -59 degrees on average, apparently, degrees Celsius, and in winter, -90 degrees as a minimum. So it's extremely cold. It's something I can't even imagine what it'll be like. There's a thing called winter over syndrome, and that is when one spends the winter in the South Pole or Antarctica for 7 to 8 months. And there you have 6 months of the year with continuous sun and 6 months of the year with no sun at all.
Correct.
So they're totally dark.
Absolutely.
Um, so I'm really curious, Eric, what training did you get when either before or during your stay in Antarctica?
Well, in regards to training, we did get myself personally, I did get a substantial amount of firefighter training, but I'm sure specific to this conversation, we also did get a lot of psychological training. There was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Nicoletti, who was at the time the head psychologist for, I believe, the Los Angeles Police Department, the team known as the Denver Broncos, which is an American football team. We don't use our feet. Um, but we got a lot of training, I guess you would say, in what were referred to as coping strategies. And in that regard, we were taught to become very aware of the folks that we were working with and what they were like in regular day-to-day operations, and then to observe deviations, and then to have support strategies, a lot of good listening skills. And then also one of the things that they really, I would almost say, beat into us was that we were to be supportive of the functional coping strategies of others, that we were not to apply our morals to the situation, so that if somebody figured something out that worked for them, even if it was disagreeable to us and wouldn't be something that we selected, we were charged with being supportive in that capacity. And having gone through that environment and experienced it, I do have a complete appreciation for it. So it was a functional process to help others get through the harsh conditions of the winter months at the South Pole.
That's interesting. What would be some examples of the coping strategies that may not be morally acceptable in other places?
Well, um, we would joke, but it was a reality that at the South Pole, we were so far removed from day-to-day life, and there was a lack of sensory input. The three vices that were available to us were smoking of cigarettes, drinking. It was a wet facility, so certainly some people turned to the bottle to relax, myself included. I was not much of a drinker prior to getting to the South Pole Station, and I certainly did partake while I was there. Additionally, the third vice would be sexual intercourse, and that was a prominent method for folks to cope. You're cooped up there with 49 people. And again, there weren't many options of things to do to relax oneself. So that was in regards to the question of, what are things that others may not find morally acceptable, would be those types of activities.
Wow, the three deadly sins,
Yeah.
mainly.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think for the most part, people were very good people. But again, it's very challenging for folks to consider what that environment was like. And if you were to really remove yourself from all the faculties of regular society, it's easy to make decisions when you have a lot of good options. It's easy to make what some folks would be looking at as a bad decision, when you have no other decisions to make. So it's limited.
Wow. Did it impact on the safety in terms like you're talking about alcohol, I don't know whether drugs was involved. Did it impact on safety at work?
I don't think that it impacted on safety. We were very cognizant of the environment that we were in. There were certainly boring days, but we used to, joke around and say that, day-to-day operations at the South Pole Station were extremely boring, but broken up by moments of sheer terror. So we were aware that things could go wrong, and we had to be prepared. Myself personally, being one of the leads on the fire brigade team, we had communications with our crew. Certainly, there were festive evenings where, parties were known to be occurring. So we would kind of have discussions beforehand about, who was going to be the most responsible party that evening. The term that they threw around regularly was that you had to maintain being fit for duty. So meaning, you could imbibe, but not become intoxicated. So with that even being said, my team still, respected that sometimes people may be less fit for duty than expected, but we kind of all just took like an oath that, be realistic, be honest. If something happens during a party, which would, I mean, there were times that we were having a great time, and those terror moments broke into that. So what we did was just have everybody, just fess up. Once we would put on our firefighter gear and muster towards the problem, everybody would just kind of identify what their level of fit for duty was, because we could certainly task people with roles that functioned for the condition that they were in. The people that were completely fit for duty would be the ones that would be moving towards the problem immediately. Folks that might have drank a little too much that evening were given roles of almost no responsibility. They might just be tasked with changing air tanks for the other personnel that are moving in and out of what we refer to as the hot zone, where the problem was active. So lots of times, so all the time, somebody had to be responsible in full bunker gear to be in the warm zone. Simply, when crew would go in and completely exhaust the air supply that they had, they would come out, and basically we would get down on all fours so that the tank was exposed and accessible. And somebody just simply had to swap the tank in and out for you, and then you can go back into the hot zone. So those types of tasks we would relegate to folks that might have had a little bit too much that night. So these are the types of coping mechanisms that we would go through on a regular basis.
So yeah, you have to work together as a team and be flexible and be forgiving as well.
Yes. Forgiveness was a large part of society at the South Pole, because you had to be tolerant of the other folks and their decisions. Not everybody got along every day. Some people didn't get along on any day, but you still had to be a professional, and you still had to work alongside these people. So it was an eye-opening experience to be in that microcosm of society and still have to find a way to function.
Yeah, there's no getting away.
Correct. There is no getting away.
So the three you said alcohol, sex, and what was the third?
Smoking of cigarettes.
Smoking cigarettes. Okay, yeah. So I guess the sex thing, would that would impact on relationships that people had. I would assume some people are married.
Mhm.
So would that be something that would be encouraged to talk to their partners, that this might happen before going onto the site? That
Yeah, I mean those
yeah.
were communications that I was married when I went down to the South Pole Station. Those were communications that I did have with my spouse before my departure. And it's I can't speak for everybody
Mhm.
else, but that was the circumstance that I came across. And yeah, I mean things happen down at the South Pole, and things happen after the South Pole, and people have to I you know protect their sanity. And it might seem um, morally abysmal to folks listening to this right now. But again, if you weren't there, you don't know. And this is just a conversation that Joyce and I are having to present to the public of what the harsh realities are of having to deal
Mhm.
with life in these circumstances. We challenge human beings to go to these environments to do the work that we ask them to do. But I think many people don't really respect the challenge that we're putting to these people and the demands that we're putting on them. Once that last plane leaves the South Pole Station for the
Mhm.
winter season, that's it. You're wholly committed, and you have to figure out what you're going to do as an individual to simply survive. Because as Joyce is learning through her research, winter over syndrome is a very real thing, and the program is familiar with it. And there are systemic problems in the program, and they don't have much that they can even do about it.
Mhm. Oh, it makes sense. It is such an extreme environment and very different from the normal. There's the isolation, being away from family, friends. You don't have the normal leisure activities that you would have access to, and you're stuck there. You can't get away.
Mhm.
Sleeping patterns would be disrupted, and loneliness, and yeah.
Absolutely. I would say that my circadian rhythm, which is the
Hmm.
sun cycles, the sleep cycles, was completely destroyed
Hmm.
during my stay at the South Pole for the year that I was there. It's never truly recovered. So that I would say is permanent damage. So if psychologists in the psychology industry um, says that
Hmm.
is negatively impacting to a person, well, then I suffer that. That's part of my experience from the South Pole that I can't argue. My circadian rhythm is destroyed. Day, night means nothing to me. Light, dark, as far as sleeping. I can cope. I
Hmm.
can do these things that I hear are extremely challenging to other people. Many people can't sleep if it's sunny out. I
Hmm.
mean, I hear that from people, but that's not an issue for me anymore because
Hmm.
of that pattern being broken.
Hmm.
And certainly, I guess, at the time that I was at the South Pole, my sleeping patterns were wholly disturbed
Hmm.
and not what one would want. So, sleep deprivation, in addition to the environmental issues, caused a cumulative effect on the psyche. And these are the things that are brought up in the studies that, folks find out about winter over syndrome, and how they negatively impact folks.
Wow. Yeah, there's been reports of a decline in cognitive functions and thyroid problems as well, mood
Mhm.
dysfunctions, uh, yeah, depression. I mean, I can't imagine 6 months without the sun. You really made a sacrifice going down there. Did you want to just give an overview of what brought, like what circumstances brought you to be working in Antarctica?
Sure.
Yeah.
The circumstances for me were pretty simple. I had my own business on Long Island doing plumbing and heating service and emergency service repairs 24 hours a day. But then the Obama administration showed up and completely decimated the American economy. I was just simply looking to keep a roof over my kids' heads, provide food for the table. And at the time, the South Pole Station and Raytheon Polar Services was the only avenue for me to receive a check. So for myself, it wasn't much of an option. I just had to do what had to be done. So I went in that direction begrudgingly.
Okay. Wow. 366 days. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, in terms of the psyche, from the beginning when you first arrive, and then through the middle, and then the end bit. Did you notice certain patterns within yourself and others of your mindset from the beginning, middle, and end of your contract there?
Absolutely. When I first got there, it really was overwhelming to arrive to that environment. There's nothing, there's no training that can prepare you for what you're up against. So when I first got there, I would say that I was very focused on trying to get acclimated because I mean, I knew I was staring down the barrel of hardship. So it was a matter of to trying to figure out coping strategies for what was already working against me. I had a lot of trouble in the beginning sleeping. I really did. With all of the daylight. We were sleeping in tents next to what's called the skiway, where the logistics was the LC-130 Hercules, which is these large four-propped military cargo planes, and they sat next to the tents where I was supposed to sleep, and they would idle. So the props kept spinning, the engines were running. The Air Force was terrified of turning those planes off for fear that they wouldn't turn on and that they themselves would be stuck with us at the South Pole. So that was standard operating procedures for those Hercs to be left running. And between the daylight and the noise, it was certainly very challenging to sleep in the beginning. And I like I mentioned earlier, I didn't drink much prior to going to the South Pole Station, but I did joke because again, I was looking for coping strategies. I was not getting sleep and I was getting fatigued, which does become a safety concern. I'm a consummate professional when it comes to work, and I was very concerned with the levels of fatigue that were accumulating in me. So I did start drinking more, and I would joke around with my crew, and then I would, people, because we were also taught to ask questions. So people would ask, how is your sleeping going? I said, oh, I found a cure for my sleeping, and it was called Black Velvet whiskey. So I started to drink more just for the ability to be able to put my head down at night and be able to get a few hours of sleep that were uninterrupted.
What about meditation, and was there a gym?
There was a gym. I did try using the gym, but physical activity was so hard to begin with the low oxygen levels, the low humidity. Um, Physical activity at the South Pole Station was extremely challenging. Losing your breath, feeling like you're suffocating, was extremely common when you started to get to high levels of work or exercise. So I did try the gym for a little bit, but it wound up, it's, how do I put it? It becomes way harder on your lungs so fast before you can reap the benefit of what people normally go to the gym for to get your muscles in your body tired from the activity. So to me, it seemed a lot more like it was detrimental than beneficial.
Wow. The cold must have been a big shock.
The cold was a massive shock. When we landed, when I arrived at the South Pole Station and the door opened on the LC-130 and that weather came in, it was literally like a smack in the face. It hit hard. And the lack of oxygen was extremely challenging for the first few days. They don't really ask you to do much physically when it comes to work. They request that you keep things on a low level of activity while you acclimate. And it's I had been working in the trades for years. I was very familiar with what the capacity for my body to do work was. And I mean, if I had to throw a number to it, I would say when I first got to the South Pole, my ability to do the work that I previously excelled at, if on any given day I could, give it 100% or give it 110%, like people say, at the South Pole when I arrived, I was lucky if I could give maybe 5 to 10% of the effort that I could normally do anywhere else in the world.
Wow. Really slowed you down.
Absolutely. Yes. It's we would try to give a reference. It would be like, your standard ability to breathe is what you're familiar with. But now imagine if you just stuck a straw in your mouth and closed your mouth around that straw and then proceeded to try to go try to run, try to do anything that's really physically taxing. And now that's how much you've limited your ability to breathe, is just whatever you can get in and out of that straw. And you'll find that you almost pass out almost immediately because you can't oxygenate enough.
Did you feel during that time that you were going insane, or did other people really lose it?
There were multiple instances where I would say people did lose it. In regards to myself feeling like I was going insane, there was a time period, approximately the 6-month mark for me. I really was having mental degradation, as you saw in the reports. It became very challenging for me to recall thoughts, memories of times of being off the ice. It started to feel to me like I had been there forever, that I couldn't quite recall not being there. And that was hard because in my brain, I was calculating, right? That, well, if 6 months feels like I've been here forever and I have 6 months to go, well, I just simply have forever left before I get out of here. So yeah, there was a time where it was technically a short period. I did get through it quickly, but I cannot deny that there was a time where that thought process put me in a funk, made me, I would say, by definition, depressed. I was not happy at that point in time, and it was very challenging, I guess you would say, to put a smile on my face.
Wow, it's interesting because that study, the study by Sandel, Van de Vijver and Smith, 2018, they found that one of the biggest stresses was the perception of time. So thinking that, oh, I've got, I thought I only had like 3 more months. No, it feels like there's 6 more months of this. Or
yes,
yeah.
And with that being said, in regards to perception of time, I was there for 366 days straight. From my perspective, it felt like I was there for 10 years.
Wow.
It really did not seem like 1 year.
Wow.
It seemed like I was there forever. It almost seemed like the life I had before was almost like a dream, that the South Pole replaced that. That this was, a new version.
Could you get out of it? Could you say to your boss, look, I want to go home?
No, we could not. Yeah, we actually had very serious, detail-oriented conversations with I guess you would say the hiring aspects of the administration, as well as the chain of command for the crew for which I would be working with. We had to sign paperwork which clearly detailed that we were duly informed that no matter what occurred during the winter season, you are going to be there until the end. Nobody can come save you. No planes will be dispatched. There is no other medical considerations or appropriations other than what is at the facility. And I mean, that was kind of everything about my job, be it the fire brigade or being a tradesman at the facility. It was all about you folks are being left on your own, and whatever happens, you have to deal with it and figure it out. I mean, that was my job.
Mm. Wow. So did you the community? So how many people work there?
During the summer season, we had approximately 280 people at maximum
Mhm.
capacity
Mhm.
between the Abinson Scott, the elevated station, and then what we referred to as summer camp, which was a battery of tents that held the summer population at those levels. In the winter season, the summer camp shuts down, and the elevated station also reduces the amount of wings that are open. And then we supported 49 souls for the duration of the winter for 2011.
Okay. How did it go in terms of getting along to, working together, sleeping together, socializing together? Were there lots of fights? Were there, how did you resolve it? Like it's almost like a microcosm of what could happen in a very isolated place.
For the
Yeah.
most part, people got along, especially on a professional level. I will state that no matter what people's personal issues might have been off the clock, whenever it came down to brass tacks reality, we were an extremely cohesive, adaptable team. But on the times that we were off the clock, things were different. There was tension, there was stress. There was stresses applied, I think, as part of the program for the research that's been going on for decades. So for our time there, what we noticed was that a certain portion of our shift worked night shift, and the vast majority worked day shift. We broke those numbers down to 60% of us worked the day shift and 40% of us worked night shift. And the tension showed up for us between what we called the 60 percenters and the 40 percenters. The 40 percenters got upset with the 60 percenters because we would have recreational events. We would schedule stuff. We had movie nights. There was, knitting clubs, which the girls attended. They called it Stitch and Bitch, which was they would knit and vent, which was a great coping strategy for that circle. But there were also all kinds of parties and things like that, and we had a lot of fun. And it seemed to me as a 60 percenter that the 40 percenters were just jealous. So they got frustrated and were actually making motions through the chain of command to shut down the partying. So it caused tension. As a perfect example, towards the tail end of the season, members of the 40 percenters ran the company store, which is where they did sell the booze. And some of the 40 percenters completely took it upon themselves. This was like a Lord of the Flies circumstance. They took it upon themselves to remove all the alcohol from the store. They decided that partying had reached such a level that, booze is no longer available. And I can only assure you that the 60 percenters had a big problem with this. So the 40 percenters actually called a meeting of the entire crew to inform everybody that there will no longer be booze for sale. And one of the funniest things that I ever saw, for all you Aussies out there, we had a Tasmanian on the crew who was our machinist, and he stood up in complete defiance of this new edict, and he stated very clearly that he had a contract that stated that, alcoholic beverages would be available for the duration of the winter season. And he laughed at their statement that the booze would no longer be available because he, myself, and almost everybody else on the crew knew exactly where it was stored. We had copious amounts of booze stored in one of the outbuildings, and he proceeded to inform them that he would instantaneously be cutting the lock, and that the only thing that they would be accomplishing in their efforts was the booze would no longer be charged for and would just be distributed for free. And and what were they going to do? Request him to manufacture them another lock? So it was it was pretty much a mutiny of some sorts that the 40 percenters made an effort to remove all of the booze from the facility, and a counter mutiny led by a Tasmanian, and the counter mutiny won.
Great. I mean, that's a bit like if I can't be happy, no one else can be happy.
Yes, exactly.
And it backfired on them.
Absolutely.
You get free booze now.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. They realized the error of their ways and understood that,
Wow. Interesting. Gosh.
yeah,
yeah.
it was quite the meeting. I was cheering them on entirely.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. In that study with Sandel and his colleagues in 2018, they did a study on psychological hibernation in Antarctica. They had reports from 27 people at the Concordia station, and they were there for 10 months. And they looked at coping strategies, or they measured it. So these were active problem solving, so acting immediately and being goal-oriented. That's one of the coping strategies. Another one, palliative reactions, so engaging in other activities, trying to relax. Number 3, avoidance and passive expectations, so withdrawing from problematic situations. And 4, comforting cognitions. So that's like thinking that there could be worse things than this, or that the situation may not be as bad as it seems. So
that's a great list.
Self-deception maybe, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great list, and I'd love to go through each one of them because I do have a lot to say on that. What was the first one?
Active problem solving, being goal-oriented, acting immediately.
That I would say we maintained consistently. Again, back to the professionalism of the entirety of the crew. It was very boring, broken up by moments of sheer terror, and we rapidly dispatched the problem with an adaptive team with massive cognitive skills. So that was never an issue. But you had made mention of what was there was a term in there about, psychological hibernation. That term just came across my radar the other day when we were looking into the research on this, and I can appreciate that. So I like that definition. Psychological hibernation to me was the ability to turn your brain off. If there was no input going on. It got to a point, about halfway through the season, what they call the third quarter. So the start of the third quarter, about just beyond the halfway mark, there was almost nothing for your brain to do unless there was an emergency. So psychological hibernation absolutely was going on. You didn't think unless you had to. And I even saying this, I know it sounds weird, but I completely experienced it and I observed it in other people. And there was a phrase that we threw around. It was called being toasty. And this is when you were, I guess you would say, suffering from this. And we would call it like, the Antarctic stare or the 1,000-yard stare. I did it. I saw other people doing it. You could walk into the galley and it's lunchtime and you can look and you'd look across the room and somebody would be sitting there with their plate of food, but they would just be, and they'd be off. They're zoned, they're completely zoned out. They're present, but it's They were in psychological hibernation. They were awake physically, but mentally they flipped the switch. They turned off for the moment. You could walk up to them, you could engage them, and then they would be forced to come out of hibernation and would be completely functional. But it was like, I guess, almost similar to dissociating. That,
Okay.
in a traumatic environment, dissociation occurs. And certainly this environment, through the duration that these folks had to endure it, was traumatizing. So I think, in many ways, what was occurring to the winter rovers, was a dissociative identity situation.
That's interesting, yeah, because in that study they said that most people engage in psychological hibernation as a way to cope.
Mhm.
And so that's almost like withdrawing yourself of to kind of avoid the situation of, going into somewhere else.
Mhm.
Would you be daydreaming or and just going off somewhere, like
Yes,
off in your
absolutely.
mind
That's what I think
for
was going
hours?
on. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, as long as, the opportunity presented itself. That,
Okay.
if you didn't need to be present,
Mm-hmm.
in the boredom that was the majority of time, yeah, that's exactly what was going on, as
Mm-hmm.
people were just kind of going somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And in an altered state, in a different, like, would it be almost in trance?
Yes, in
Yeah,
trance, which
altered
I would
state.
say in a way it was almost like they were in a trance. I could
Mm-hmm.
agree with that.
And I'm actually quite positive about that because that means in our abilities as a human being, we
Hmm.
have coping mechanisms
Hmm.
inbuilt where we can sustain such a harsh environment, like we can escape it if
Hmm.
we want to.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So
know.
I think
I
that's
agree.
wonderful.
I
Yeah.
feel in hindsight that it's a very natural response to the environment.
Hmm.
That if studies have shown for decades and decades and decades that this is how people learn to function and learn to cope. This is the toolkit that they learn to become experts with.
Hmm. And the others, so like palliative reactions, I guess engaging in relaxing activities,
Hmm.
avoidance and passive expectations, so withdrawing from problematic situations,
Hmm.
comforting cognition. So would you try and um, manipulate how the reality to try and make it more palatable, like oh, it's not as bad.
Hmm.
I don't
Absolutely.
know.
And
Yeah.
this was also part of what we were trained to do, is to kind of be able to, take the pulse of individuals
Mhm.
and the community at large and assess, I guess you'd say, the level of morale of both the individuals and the community, and
Mhm.
to work towards elevating the morale always. Like that was part of our job and part of our training. So on an individual level, it was like if I was working with you, obviously we would have interactions and I would have an understanding of who Joyce is and her day-to-day functions. And you would always be kind of testing the waters, like just simple conversations like, "Good
Mhm.
morning, Joy. How are you doing today?" And then, watching how your answers deviate from day to day, and then realizing the moments where you might need a pick me up. So
Mhm.
it could be something as simple as, because we learn so many details about everybody. It might be, what is Joyce's favorite cookie or candy or something, and you might be hard at work at your desk, and I might have noticed that you've been stressing out. So I'll go to the galley, I'll grab some snacks, I'll go over to your desk. Here you go, Joyce. And then
Mm.
you would,
So
elevate
you
person
really looked after one another, like you were
in.
trained to um, assess someone's,
Hmm.
mental health
Absolutely.
and well-being, and
Absolutely.
everyone did that. Like, was everyone
I think
trained to
so.
look after?
I think our crew did an excellent job of that.
Hmm.
I had people do it for me. I did it for other people. I observed other people doing it for other people. This It's the teamwork that's required to function there. This is what gets a crew through that harsh environment or circumstance. Just in
Mm.
that in that concept of things that we did as a team. So one of the television rec rooms, the recreation room, we kind of took it over because we had multiple rec rooms available to us. So one of them we took over and put in all kinds of decorations. We put up all kinds of lighting and stuff, and we turned it into a nightclub. And we referred to it as Club Deep Freeze. So that I would say started on the front end of the winter season. Myself and some other coworkers got together and had this idea, and we hatched this scheme to, take over one of the rec rooms. And that worked really well for a while as a decompressing tool. So, when we realized that the morale of the team in a particular week might be dwindling, we would start to put up signs around the facility. This Friday night, from 6 p.m. till late, Club Deep Freeze will be open. And we would pick a theme, for that particular Friday night. Maybe it's 70s night, maybe it's, hippie 60s night, or rock of the 80s. But we would work together as a team. We had what we called a craft room, which seemed to have an unlimited supply of things to be creative with. So the team members would work together and pick a theme and do that. And Club Deep Freeze was a very great tool for increasing morale and decompressing the tension that was going on. And that would seem to cross the lines between the 60 percenters and the 40 percenters for a bit. So people would enjoy that stuff. Later on in the season, when that seemed to not have the positive impact that it used to, gets a little old when that's the only thing you can throw at the problem. So that coping strategy started to wear a bit thin. So like I mentioned earlier, there were certain wings that were shut down for the entirety of the winter season. So what myself and some other crew members came to as a solution was we took one of the rooms in these wings and we turned it into a speakeasy. So it was like a secret bar, and as if we're getting away with something, which was also coping strategies that we understood that, and anything that we can do as a team against anything else caused cohesion and a boost in morale through the solidarity. So by utilizing the speakeasy, we titled Tequila Sunrise. So even just in that idea of, sunrise was something that we always looked forward to. Once we had sunset and we stepped into that 6 months of dark, sunrise was something that was always in the conversation to look forwards to. So Tequila Sunrise, as the title of our speakeasy, functioned very well. So we started utilizing that coping strategy, that tool, when we saw morale dwindling again. We would, pass the secret word,
So you really made your
Sunrise.
own fun.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's great that they had the facilities and resources for you all to do that. With conflict, how did you resolve conflict? And can you tell us about the common enemy strategy?
Oh, sure. Conflict was, for the most part, resolved between individuals having conversations with maybe some other crew members around, to be almost like referees, just to keep everybody on the same page. We were all adults for the most part. Every now and then stuff would be brought to the level of HR getting involved, but those circumstances were really for the people that weren't adult enough to engage in open conversation, and that was unfortunate. But as far as the team building and the common enemy, we were trained on this as well. So Denver was considered the headquarters that we reported to from South Pole Station. That was our lifeline to the world, our single point of contact from South Pole outward. Everything went to Denver. So they kind of inculcate into the South Pole winter over community that solidarity can be manufactured by having a common enemy. And they pretty much suggest that you utilize Denver for that. Like let them be the whipping boy. So anything anything that we didn't like occurring, it was pretty much like Denver made this happen, and screw Denver. And it was through that solidarity and the common enemy that we had a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
That's a clever strategy, I think, to bond people
I think it's
when you
very
need to do
functional.
it quickly.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
sadly, we see that all around the world is that,
Yeah.
divide and conquer and the manufacturing of a common enemy is utilized and works really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I've read that that there are 3 stages of when adaptation to the harsh conditions can occur. And it was suggested in some studies that there's an initial stage, the anxiety stage, which is at the beginning of your placement.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go into the depression and boredom stage. And then the last stage is anticipation, including euphoria and aggression, the last period. Do you relate to that? Did you observe that those 3 stages happening at the beginning, middle, and end of your placement there?
Absolutely. Certainly, I had the concerns at the front end, the anxiety, the apprehension, like, what did I do? It was really palatable. I could taste it. When the winter season officially started and we watched the last plane depart, it was so real. The feeling of being stranded there. It was really like, what did I do? How did I get myself involved in this? Like that's the last plane. It's gone. And I mean, literally anybody could have at the last second said, I don't want to do this. I don't think I can make it. I'm getting on the last plane. Like that was an option. So once that last plane left and you lost the ability to exercise that option, it was like really having to deal with a decision that you made. And I remember the challenge of that. In regards to the final stage, there was absolute euphoria. I would say when the sunrise was occurring, when we got to that point and everything had passed, we had gotten through the night at South Pole Station and the sun rose. It was just like, it was glorious. It was completely euphoric. And then in regards to the aggression towards the tail end, I think of it like going through boot camp. That in the beginning, you're controlled, you're crushed by the program, right? Whether in the military, whether it's the drill instructor or like at the South Pole Station, it would be, the Raytheon administration. By the tail end, just like in boot camp, by the end of boot camp, the drill instructors can barely control the recruits anymore. They've been so trained and fired up, and everything that they've had thrown at them, they've overcome. So it's very hard for the drill instructor to control the recruits at the end of boot camp. And I would say that was very similar to the South Pole winter overs, that, similar, like the mutiny over the booze. There was no stopping us at that point. There was nothing that Raytheon could do to contain the activities. There was miscellaneous things going on where, they could threaten your bonus if you didn't listen to, what was going on. And there were people that, I'm not going to out other people in their circumstances, but let's just say that there were certainly situations where threats were made to people for their activities, and get in line, or your bonus could be negatively impacted. And people, let's just say, were aggressively responding to the administration that you're not going to control me. And
Mhm.
that was observed in many facets and folks.
Mhm. Okay. Wow. I know this situation really sets itself up for a fantastic opportunity to study. Like, did you feel that you were all being studied and experimented on?
I knew we were.
Mm-hmm.
There was a library at the South Pole which had fantastic books in it, but there was a special bookcase, glass sliding doors on it with a lock. And it's not that you couldn't go in there, you just had to request the key from management so that they knew who was going in there. A lot of the books that were in that bookcase, that's the only place on the planet that these books exist. So I
Wow.
was very interested in that
Mm-hmm.
bookcase.
Mm-hmm.
And inside that bookcase were the results of the psychological evaluations of the winter overs at the South Pole from 1957 until 1994.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading them.
Wow.
And what I
Okay.
discovered was very similar to the military and boot camp, is that they have procedures that they put everyone through every time. Every person that goes to boot camp, whether it was 1957 or 1994, they're being treated the same way. It is a process. So I learned through reading these books that there very much was experimentation going on for the winter rovers, and the process was the same every year. And it got to the point where I started to realize, like, where we were day to day in this processing, in this experimentation. So I even had conversations with the person from HR, because of things that were going on. I addressed it. I said, listen, I said, we're having these problems in the facility. I said, but this is not a coincidence. This is not an accident. I said, look, right here, it's in the book. Like, what's going on? The company is doing this to us. Um, and she said to me, I don't know why you think that Raytheon would be doing this to us. And I said, it's not that I think it. I said, I know it. Look, it's right here in this chapter. They did this that week. They're doing this week. And I'm going to bet that what they're doing in this week in the book is what's going to happen to us next week. So I,
Mm-hmm.
I I learned that we absolutely were in the throes of an experiment that happened every single year. Apparently, they just stopped putting the results books in the case in 1994, but there I was in 2010 observing the exact same activities that had gone on previously for decades.
Mm-hmm.
As an example of things that were in that book, um, in the company store they had prices for things that we could purchase, right? Cigarettes, booze, hats and gloves that say South Pole Station, things that you can bring home to your friends and family as, gifts from your travel. They had toothpaste, toothbrushes, toiletries, just, essentials, candy bars, things that, would, let people feel like they're living life, but limited selection on stuff. But right there in the psychological studies, they discussed how they would manipulate the pricing just to observe the reaction in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So, toothpaste might be $2.50, and then all of a sudden they make it $4.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as if the company is checking their ledger books and it's like, we're not doing so good this year. We're going to have to raise the price of toothpaste at the South Pole. There was no financial reason to do it, but as
Mm-hmm.
stated in the experiments, it was just to see how it agitated the population. So there
Mm-hmm.
was there was an ability on many levels for the company to exercise increasing tension in the community. and they did it regularly by many different means. And
Mm.
so these are the things that I was bringing up to HR, is that, they were kind of in a way crashing down on portions of the population for how they were reacting to things. But I was pointing out that these weren't natural situations. So I felt that it was wrong to be addressing things the way that they were when the company was creating the problem.
Mm-hmm. It's
It's
pretty immoral
yeah, it
to
was
be experimented on and not have your consent, not be transparent.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
I
yeah.
I felt that it was wrong to threaten someone's bonus
Mm-hmm.
when they were reacting to a circumstance that was created by the company for the express purpose of making someone mad and reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they were just trying to save money.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, if we get them all mad enough, we can cause them to do things that would compromise their bonus.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is, one of the many reasons that I say Raytheon was the devil incarnate in corporate form. What they were doing to the people in these programs was to the detriment of the personnel and the benefit of the corporation all day long.
So this can be applied like anywhere to agitate people and to continually agitate people so we're never at peace, or to get people to focus on or get distracted on things and emotionally attached to things.
I agree, because having gone through the process at the South Pole Station and becoming aware of these machinations around me, I see it everywhere in society now that I'm outside of South Pole, that people do not realize how much of the environment around them is structured, and that there are dials that can be tweaked, that tension can be increased in society with a known reaction because it's been going on for years. So this is, part of what I warn people in their, worldly affairs now is, pay attention to these machinations. Understand that a lot of society around us is contrived, and there are other folks that have access to the dials that are, manipulating your friends and family.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to be aware of if we want to be free and free within ourselves, and not have our emotional energy be caught up with things, artificial things that agitate us, where we can use that energy for better things in terms of finding out how we can be free, or how can, what's the optimal way to live, and what's good for the well-being of our community, rather than focusing on all these artificially generated problems to agitate us. And
yeah, there are folks out there that are just simply pushing our buttons. That's their job. There's aspects of the world around us that are very good at it, and they know what they're doing. They know what button to push to get the reaction that they're looking for, just like I observed at the South Pole Station.
So did you change as a person from going in and then coming out? And how did you change?
Wow. I absolutely changed. I don't think I realized it so much at the time, but now in hindsight, I mean, I would say I changed on almost every level. It was, I mean, almost, I don't want to use the term because it makes me sound bad, but when you say like when a snake sheds its skin, it's, it gets rid of the old and comes out new, crabs, lobsters, there's all kinds of creatures that do this. But I would say it was almost like that. Like I had to shed what was me to become something else that could get through that. The harshness of the environment, it was, I would have to go from building to building every day to check on things out in that environment, and the reality is, I mean, I literally would speak out loud.
Mhm.
I would have communications with Mother Nature that, at the South Pole Station, Mother Nature has done a very good job to make sure nothing is alive there. And it is very palpable when you exit the building and have to go and do the rounds to these buildings that Mother Nature's trying to kill you. And I guess back to the aggression that you mentioned before. My conversations with Mother Nature were aggressive
Mhm.
because I looked at her as being aggressive against me. So I considered Mother Nature to be working towards my demise, and I would exit the building and vocalize, when the weather was at its worst, when whiteout conditions existed, when I would, on the rare occasion, actually get lost and have to, really consider what's going on. Those were the moments, almost like Lieutenant Dan in the movie Forrest Gump, when he's up on the ship and he's thumbing his nose at God and calling down the lightning. I had moments like that out in the elements where I basically told Mother Nature, like, screw you, you're not going to get me today. And I was pretty much just challenging her, like, oh, this is all you got. I can take this and more. Show me your worst. And I guess I would say I was having aggressive communications with Mother Nature.
Wow. Was there any beautiful moments?
Yes, my eyes are blessed. The things that I got to see at the South Pole, the winter season, um, are beyond words. I mean, I can express what I saw, but it will not really give an indication to people. So, being the highest, driest place on a clear day, since there was, nothing to block the view of outer space, all I had to simply do was exit a building, turn away from the building, and just raise my gaze just a few degrees. And then at that point, the entirety of the earth would just drop out of view. And I could turn and rotate. And the only thing I saw was the cosmos and all of its glory, would be the best way that I could put it. It was
Wow.
like being in space. No different view than if you're in the space station way up there. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I mean, when I say like density of star clusters and universes, galaxies, nebulas, I mean, it never ended. What was gorgeous. Auroras, the Aurora Australis. The season that I was wintering was a very powerful year for solar storms, which made substantial auroras, which I had the benefit of witnessing with great regularity. Um, there were many times that I'd be walking from building to building, and the auroras would be of such intensity that I would seize the moment. I would lay down on the ice and just look up and just soak in um, beauty beyond description.
Wow. Sounds beyond words.
It's there
Mhm.
is no video, there is no camera
Mhm.
that anybody has ever taken that does justice for what you see with your eyes. It is not a reasonable facsimile of what you actually observe. It is a complete bastardization of reality to try to capture these events on film because there's a lot that gets compromised in the ability for the technology to gather that information.
Mhm.
So it's not the same as what you see. And I know a lot of people look at pictures and videos and they go, "Oh wow, that's amazing." It
Did
falls
that
short.
did that connect you or trigger some sort of relationship with the universe or to your or something greater when you saw that?
Yeah, I mean it was a powerful observation.
Mhm.
It makes you realize how small you are in the big picture of
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
So yeah, um, it's there's a lot to be said for knowing
Mhm.
that something else is going on out there. And I would say, from my perspective, what I saw there made me know that the cosmos is so vast. It's not possible for us to be the only thing out there. I mean, it's just, I can't prove it to anyone, but you can't discount it for me. I mean, I saw what I saw. It's it's too big.
Mhm.
There has to be other activity. It's just, you couldn't convince me otherwise.
Mhm. Mhm. Mm. That's so amazing, Eric. And I think you're one of, I think it's only a small percentage of people that could go to the Antarctic and survive mentally. Yeah, so that's yeah, amazing what you've shared. Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners? Any take-home message?
I guess the take-home message, in regards to this conversation, would be to look around the world, or I should say, look around your world, and try to pay attention to the machinations of those that are applying intentions to your environment for the outcome they prefer, which is not necessarily to your benefit. So there are some folks out there, similar to I had to experience with Raytheon, um, turning the dials. Um, I think if people pay attention to the world around them, they'll start to realize that there are dial turners in their life. And we rebelled against it at the South Pole Station. And I highly suggest that in your community, if you can find dial turners, you rebel against them and or support those that do.
Fantastic. Great message to end on. Thank you so much, Eric.
You're
It's
very
been
welcome.
a
Thank you for having
privilege.
me.
You're welcome.
Check out
Thank
Salubrious
you.
Events.
Yes, and deciphering
.tv.
.tv. Thank you. See you, everyone.